Hello and welcome to Tina's Corner podcast. We are a group of like-minded sign language interpreters set out to improve the field of sign language interpreting. We have deaf, hearing, and deaf-blind consumers, and both hearing and deaf interpreters. And the focus of this podcast is to strengthen the bond between those groups of individuals. All persons, regardless of years of experience, will benefit. I am Tina Perry, and I welcome you. Today, I have invited John Lestina to share his insights and experiences so that others can see that interpreters travel different roads on their journey, only to arrive at the same destination: equality of information for all consumers. Welcome, John.
Hi, Tina.
Hi, I'm so glad you took the time out to be here with us. I know you have an extremely busy schedule, but I know that our audience, our viewing audience, is going to benefit from your words of wisdom today. Let me introduce...
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let me introduce everybody to John. Now, I know the show is only about 25 minutes. This is pretty lengthy because John is quite accomplished. But this is John Lestina Jr., and he is the president and founder of Heritage Interpreting. John has a master's degree in entertainment business from Full Sail University. He is a nationally RID certified interpreter and also is a legally qualified interpreter in Ohio and Indiana. Now, both John's parents are deaf and is a native user of ASL in English. Now, John was born in Illinois, Joliet, Illinois, outside of Chicago, but he grew up in Fishers, Indiana. He's also lived in Orlando, Washington, D.C., and Boston for several years before settling in my hometown of Columbus, Ohio. Now, John travels quite a bit from New England, Washington, D.C., Florida, Chicago, and most places in between. John has a beautiful family, a beautiful little girl that we love watching on Facebook, how she's grown so quickly already. His wife is Christy, and they have a daughter, Junifer. Now, here's the awesome thing about John. John is a CODA, a child of deaf adults, for those who may not know. He is a CODA, but so is John's wife. And now they have a daughter who is a GODA, grandchild of deaf adults as well. So they are a bilingual household using both ASL and English daily. One nice thing also about John is he has 4 cats. There's Newman, Oscar, Leo, and Sabrina. Boy, John, that's quite the list there. You have quite the household. That's awesome.
We've got a zoo over here.
You know, John, as I was walking this morning, I was thinking about you and your wife both being CODAs, and I thought, gosh, I don't know very many CODA, husband and wives. And then I was walking, I said, wait a minute, Tina, your first husband is a CODA. And I thought, well, why did I not associate that before? And so you and I talked a little bit about this, and now to my, I don't know if this is it is not a correct way of thinking that CODA usually is related to the fact that whether or not they interpret. And it's definitely not, but it was just like, how did I miss that? I can't believe I did that.
Yeah. I actually know several other couples who are both CODAs. It seems to be more and more popular these days, I suppose. And it's funny, you mentioned your first husband not being involved in interpreting, and that influenced the way you perceived him as a CODA. I went to a CODA party once, and there were several people there who were not working as interpreters, and they would often introduce themselves as not working in the family business.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was really funny. I really liked that, the way they said that, yeah.
Yeah, I've never done that, but I understand. I definitely understand that. John, I just would like for you to take us back on how you met your wife.
How I met my wife? Sure, yeah. We were both in college at the time. I was at Full Sail University studying. I have an undergrad in recording arts and music business, and so I'm like a trained audio engineer in that regard. And then I got my master's degree in entertainment business, which is just a business degree focused on the entertainment industry. And my wife was at UCF, University of Central Florida, which happens to be like 5 miles down the street from Full Sail. And she was studying speech and language pathology. She was also the president of the ASL club at UCF, and they hosted a deaf tailgate party during one of the UCF football games. Me and my friends, who happened to be deaf, I should clarify. Everywhere I go, I always end up meeting best friends. So I grew up in Indianapolis, and when I moved to Florida, immediately I found my deaf friends, my community, my people, and we used to party and hang out and everything during college. And so me and my deaf friends wanted to go to this deaf tailgate that was being hosted by the ASL Club at UCF. So we went, and that's where my wife and I met, was there at that tailgate. It's kind of neat because there's a photo of us together in a group, and that's the first day we met, and so we have a photograph of the day we met. And then we hit it off right away. We stayed friends for about 4 years. She had a boyfriend, I had a girlfriend, and so we stayed friends for about 4 years. And then we started dating after that. We started dating long distance. By the time we started dating, we had left Florida. She was living in Boston, and I was living in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been a fun journey for sure.
How long was that between the time you met to the time you started dating?
Just over 4 years.
Wow.
Just over 4 years, yeah.
That's awesome.
And then we started dating, and then after 6 months of doing the long distance thing, I moved on up to Boston, and the rest is history.
Well, we knew it was serious then. That's great. And isn't it? I bet it was really great that both of your families could communicate with each other. Nobody had to play the interpreter between the two families.
Yeah, that's ideal.
That is ideal. You know what I wish I would have done for this interview was to ask your wife to join us. I would have loved, maybe we can do that another time, where I would kind of like to hear your stories to see what the similarities or the differences are. And of course there are, but that would have been, I wish I would have done that. So maybe we can do another interview with the both of you together.
Yeah, that would have been fun.
So John, tell me, as a CODA, and you fit so many different things. As a CODA, you own your own business. There's so many things that you can talk about. Today we're going to try to rein it in on being a CODA, and then we'll get into a little bit about your agency as well, if we have time.
Sure.
First of all, John, tell me, you growing up as a CODA in the household, where are you in, or are there other brothers and sisters?
Where am I in the pecking order?
That's right.
Yeah, I'm the oldest. I have a little brother. We're 19 months apart. I think we're 19 months apart. We're pretty close in age, but I'm the oldest, and it's just the two of us, my brother and I. His name is Jason. So it's just the two of us. And growing up as the oldest, I'm sure as most other people have shared, I did the heavy load of the interpreting. Okay. Yeah.
And so, I'm the ring finger. That's what I tell people. I'm the ring finger. There's 5 of us, and I'm the ring finger. And my sister, she did the heavy load, like what you're talking about. Social Security, all the important stuff. Right. And I was the funerals and wedding girl. Okay. That was my job. So it's kind of funny that, and here's the ironic, with 5 people in my family, brothers and sisters, just my older sister and myself pursued a career, and the rest of them did not. So did your brother?
No, he did not. He worked for a short time as an interpreter while he was still trying to, get on his feet, fresh out of college kind of a thing. But he's got a very successful career of his own. He's a software engineer.
Wow. At
this moment, he's working for Salesforce as a senior software engineer, and he's doing very well. So nice. No, he's not working in the family business.
So we just kind of talked about your certain tasks. How did you feel about that? I mean, now looking at it might be different, but growing up, considering, I don't know what you considered it as the family interpreter or whatever, how did you feel about that responsibility?
Yeah, good question. So, and you're absolutely right. How I felt about it then versus how I feel about it now is very different. Looking back on it now, it's an experience I'm very grateful for. I feel very bonded to my family and to my community. I feel like I've learned a lot from it. That experience taught me a lot, helped me grow into the man I am today. But in the moment, while I'm growing up, especially in those teenage years, of course, I hated it. Oh my God, I hated it. I couldn't stand to be asked to interpret. And I was very clear with my family that when I grew up, I would never be an interpreter. Yeah, I definitely. I felt very strongly about that. I felt like I was being used almost, right?
Sure.
Yeah. But that was my feeling when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. As I grew up and as my brother grew up and my parents got back to being just the two of them without kids around, they made it very clear to me that they're beyond capable of taking care of themselves. They need my brother or I. They can navigate the world just fine, right? Like most people do. I still find myself doing this older CODA protective thing whenever I'm around them. And I'll give you an example. We took a family trip to Cancun a few years ago, and on the flight back, well, the day before we flew back, my dad got really sick, and so that day that we were flying back home, he was very sick. I mean, he couldn't hardly walk, so we had to get him a wheelchair. We're pushing him to the airport, and then we got to go through not just security but the customs and all that. And so I was very anxious, and I was high strung, and I was attached to my parents the whole time, and I was Mr. Interpreter and Mr. Guaranteeing my parents have the right access all throughout this entire experience, while my wife, my brother, and his wife just kind of lagged behind, like, oh, brother, there goes Johnny. You know what I mean? So I still have that. I wish I could turn it off. My parents certainly don't need it. They're fine, but it lives within me, I suppose.
Yes,
so,
I know exactly
it
what
reared
you
its
mean.
ugly head.
It does, and I know when my father was in the nursing home, issues would come up, and I can hear his voice, Tina, leave it alone. Don't worry, I'm fine. And it's like, no, Dad, this is not right. And he's like, oh, it's like, that is hard to turn off. I agree. I think it's just a part of who we are. It definitely is.
For sure.
So,
for sure.
I hear you say you were just a little bit rebellious, and I think that's a common, I've heard that before, a common thing. I don't think we should feel guilty or upset about that. I think that's just a natural part of growing up. But can you tell me...
It's nice to hear you say that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Can you tell me, John, we look at the world today, technology and all the things that deaf people have access to. What do you think the benefits I think there are benefits with us as being older CODAs compared to the younger CODAs today. Do you see things that we had more, I don't know if we want to say benefits, I don't know. What I'm trying to get at is, what differences do you see between the current CODAs and CODAs of our time?
Absolutely. Great question. So for me, at this moment, I just turned 34 years old. So in my experience growing up in Fishers, Indiana, which is just a suburb outside of Indianapolis, we have in Indianapolis, a very strong school for the deaf. We have a deaf club, which is still there. Deaf clubs have been shutting down all over the country for a long time now, and Indianapolis still has a strong deaf club. So growing up in that community, I and my parents worked at the school for the deaf. So for me, growing up, every school year I was at the Indiana School for the Deaf homecoming events. My mom was a teacher there, so I was there for all kinds of the events at the school. I grew up going to a summer camp called Camp Willard as the only hearing kid there. Wow. It was a summer camp for the deaf kids at the school at ISD. And so I grew up going to that. I also grew up going to the deaf club all the time. Once a week we would go to the deaf club. Every month there was an organization called the Hoosier. People who live in Indiana are called Hoosiers. Hoosier Outdoor Club for the Deaf, HOCD, and every month a big group of, maybe sometimes only 15 and sometimes upwards of 60 deaf people would all get together at a campground and spend 3, 4, 5 days camping out there. So I did all these different things within my community growing up, right? That was my life. That was what I was used to. I didn't know anything else. And with that being my experience, I've always felt very grateful about having deaf parents. My experience of having a deaf family has been very positive, and it's something I'm very grateful for. In my experience going to CODA conference or different meetings and getting to know a variety of CODAs with different life experiences and as you've mentioned, from different generations, one thing I've noticed is that feeling of having deaf family being a positive experience and something to be grateful for. I didn't see a lot of that in some of the older generations. I don't want to say all or even a lot, but some of the older generation of CODAs would share that their experience is very negative, that they experienced a lot of oppression directly themselves. And not to say that the oppression doesn't still happen, but just that it was more profound in their experience. Um, so I think that's an interesting shift. So perhaps that's a benefit for the younger CODAs coming up. But I would say something that they're missing out on is that social engagement, the deaf clubs,
Exactly.
going to large events at the deaf school. Like I said, I went to the Hoosier Outdoor Club for the deaf. I think they still do that, and I think it's a group of 4 people who go these days. I don't know. It's not very big like it used to be. And of course, social media and technology has its role in why these events are not as popular. The deaf community used to get together in person on a regular basis because it was the only time they would have linguistic and cultural access in a large group of people like them. So that, of course, I mean, we all desire that. But with social media, you can have that access without leaving your living room. You have it right there on your phone. So that's a benefit. I mean, that is a good thing for the deaf community to have that type of access readily available. But the downside, the draw of it is that you start to miss out on some of the motivation to host these types of large events. But I think Deaf Expo out in Las Vegas, that's still happening, and there'll be thousands and thousands of deaf people there, and that's happening this summer. So it's not like there's no opportunities. You just might have to look a little bit harder and be willing to travel a little farther to get to them.
Yeah. Did you ever remember your parents going to a friend's house? And of course, we couldn't call, so we go.
You don't call, you don't knock, you just go and you show up. You walk right in the front door.
Right. Yeah. Or sometimes you get there and they're not home. Okay, let's go back home.
Absolutely.
1 hour later, we're going to try again. It's like, are you kidding?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I remember
I was.
Go ahead.
No, you please, Tina, go ahead.
No, I was just going to go to another, when I'm at the Deaf Club and it's 2:30 a.m., the Deaf Goodbyes. Finally, I'm like, pull 2 of the big red chairs. We had red cushioned chairs. We'd push them together and use them as a bed and cover up with the coat. I'm talking 2:30 a.m.
We had same kind of thing. We'd be at the Deaf Club and our parents would say, all right, go get your coats. It's ready. It's time to leave. We're ready to go. So we'd go, we'd get our coats, we'd get ready to go. We're all bundled up, and here they are. They're still over there talking. It's like, let's go. And it would take them hours and hours before we
You're sweating inside your coat.
Exactly, yeah.
I interrupted you when you were saying about going to a deaf person's house when they weren't there. Were you going to add to that?
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to remember what I was going to say.
Okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
I think one day we need to get together and a bunch of CODAs. Let's do a Zoom call. Of course, I don't know how that's going to be. I know how we are competing with each other, but maybe doing a Zoom call where we just tell all of our crazy stories. And sometimes they were just like, it's 2:30, or I not want to go to your friend's house again, or you're right. So there's just so many things.
I've really gotten that experience, of connecting and sharing with other CODAs at CODA conference. I don't know if you've ever been, but there is an international CODA conference, and as of now, from what I understand, every other year is in the United States. So there'll be a gathering in the United States, and then the following year it'll be somewhere else in the world. And the last one that was hosted right before the pandemic broke out, and that was in France. And my wife and I were lucky enough to be able to attend. And so we got to travel to France and be with, our CODA brothers and sisters from all over the world. And it was such a rich experience, and we're all sharing our unique experiences, which are unique, but then there's also a lot of shared experience, which helps, we all bond. We just met today, but we all feel connected. It was great.
Yeah.
And there's what we kind of call the sunrise. They call it the Sunrise Club. There's an event, I guess, at the conference where it's like entertainment night, and then there's like a bar, and people can hang out and everything else. And on that night, it's very common to have a large group of CODAs who just don't go to bed, and you stay up all night and you watch the sunrise. It's the Sunrise Club. And it's a fun, it's party, but a lot of that time is spent, like you said, like reminiscing, sharing CODA experience, and connecting and making bonds with each other. So it's a cool experience. Yeah, if you have a chance to go to International CODA Conference, I highly recommend it.
Well, Ron Opatish.
Of course.
Yeah, so he
was there as well.
Come on, you gotta go. And he said the next one is in what, South Korea? Am I right about that?
It's in South Korea. Yeah, if it was in North
Yeah,
Korea,
that would
I
be a
think they'd have
problem.
hard time getting anyone to go.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, that's why I said
Yeah.
North or South, because I wasn't sure. But yeah, and then he
Yeah.
said the next one will be back in the United States. And he talks so highly of the CODA clubs. And he's like, I can't believe you haven't gone yet. And I said, yeah, I can't either. So you sound very encouraging. I'm probably
It's rich.
will go. Yeah, very good.
It's rich.
So
if you enjoyed your time growing up at the Deaf Club,
Yes.
this will be the closest thing you'll find.
Yeah, exactly. And oh, just the things that we did at the Deaf Club. You know, it was so funny. And I'm digressing here because now you're bringing this all up in me as well. But, you know, on Friday, we as kids were allowed to go to the Deaf Club on Fridays, but not on Saturday. And they did nothing different.
Oh, interesting.
And nothing happened differently on Saturday than it did on Friday. And it was so, yeah, it was...
No extra responsibility. No kids allowed.
Exactly it. But it was every Friday we were allowed to go, and you can count. We were there every single Friday, and so many things that happened there. And again, I think it just added to who I am today.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So, John, you interpreted for your family. Were there any other deaf family members that you interpreted for, or was it just your parents?
Yeah, good question. Only my parents are deaf. The rest of my family, on both sides of my family, are all here. And nobody knows sign language outside of, my nuclear family, my brother and me and my parents. There are a few family members who have learned the alphabet, or a few family members who have learned a few signs here and there. Of course, there's a couple of home signs and things like that. But they do not know ASL. They don't know the language. They just have some kind of way to communicate with their brother or sister or whatever that gets by in a pinch for them. So I've spent a lot of time. I don't like family reunions or any type of family gatherings.
I understand.
Work. Yeah. So that's the dynamic there.
So I guess I should have rephrased my question too. Were there any other deaf people that you had to interpret for? Because I'm sure you interpreted for many of the hearing family members. With
yes,
your mom.
Indeed.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
In my mom's side of the family, I know you're going to think this is crazy. There's 14 kids, and of those 14, 6 are deaf. And
that's amazing.
That is amazing. So there was a lot. Whenever they would all get together, they were just entertaining. So I didn't really get that. You know, with Grandma, we would interpret for her. But yeah. Anyway, I don't mean to get off on that. You're just making all this come back to me. Maybe you should be interviewing me as well. John, can you give me one interpreting assignment that you did as a kid that really stands out, something vivid that you just can't seem to get out of your memory bank?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I have a hard time thinking of it because it's such an ingrained part of my experience. I don't know if there's any one thing that stands out. I will say there's an experience of, I must have been 13, 14 maybe, and a man came to the house. I didn't know what was going on, of course, and he wanted to talk to my parents about money. I didn't know what the heck was going on, and I interpreted the entire interaction. He was from the bank, and my parents were talking about getting a refinance on the home, which, of course, now I understand what that's all about, but I had no idea. Equity? What the heck is equity to a 13-year-old kid?
Yeah.
And or escrow accounts. I had no idea. So I had, so of course I had, I interpreted that whole exchange, and I had no idea what was going on. And when my grandmother passed away, I was 15, and the house phone rang, and I answered the phone. It's my uncle, and he tells me, and then so now I have to go outside where my dad's working and tell Dad that his mom passed away. So that's, and I think that's a common CODA experience where we're the ones who break the news to our parents.
Yeah.
Where I think in most families, it's the other way around. The parents break the news to the kids. So there was that, and then I interpreted Grandma's funeral. So there's that,
Yeah. Isn't it amazing looking back, like as kids, people relied on us to carry on adult conversations to interpret adult conversations. My cousin, she was the court interpreter for her parents' divorce.
That's insane.
And she was probably like 11 or 12. And she talks about it. I interviewed her, and she talks about it. Can you imagine that? Interpreting between
the courts allowed it.
Yes. And you know what? I'm not even surprised that today that's still, I know you're a legal interpreter, and I get that, but if they could get by with it, people still try to get by with that stuff. I'm just saying.
Of course they do.
And,
oh gosh, yes.
You know,
Well, and plus, you know, I manage an interpreting agency, Heritage Interpreting, and we see it all the time. People will try to skate by, getting out of paying for access anytime they can, doing whatever they can.
It's amazing when I have to interpret. Don't you have a son or a daughter or a family member that can come with you? And and it's all I can do to interpret that. It's like, you really are asking this question, aren't you? So it's just amazing to me how that happened and can still happen if it's allowed. I don't know.
I used to let it really frustrate me and anger me, and I've had, and in working with Heritage Interpreting and seeing it as, you know, much more often now because of my role, I have to remind myself that people are doing the best they can. Yeah. Right? Those types of questions are rooted in ignorance, and ignorance in the best sense, right? Ignorance strictly meaning that they just don't know what they don't know. Right. And that we can choose a positive response and help them learn. And once they've been exposed to the proper way of thinking about it, if they still continue, then it's no longer ignorance, it's stupidity, because now they know and they're still choosing it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think most people just have to choose my positive response.
Exactly. I think that's
I've been practicing.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. That is great advice. So you kind of already talked a little bit about some of your characteristics that you have developed from being a CODA, being within the deaf community. I heard you say, you know, you're overprotective. Are there any other things that you think you still carry on?
It's a good question. One thing so I don't know if this is about being a CODA or if this is just something my mother has instilled in me, but I would say one of my core values is stewardship, being of service. That I know that's something my mother has always been very clear is an important value to have, and so it's definitely been one of my core values. I don't know if that's to do with being a CODA or not, but I think being a CODA with a core value of stewardship, they go well together because I have an entire community that I can be a steward of. And when I say stewardship, to me that is like one step beyond service, right? There is service, and then there's service with love, and that is stewardship.
I like that.
Yeah, that's how I always look at it. So I don't know if that's a CODA characteristic or if it's something my mom has given to me. But I know that my core value of stewardship mixed with being a CODA has definitely given me a leg up, I think.
A great combination.
Yeah.
So you decided one day, I'm going to do this for a living. When do you think that happened?
That happened while I was in college. All right. So, well, kind of. So let me be clear. So I was at Full Sail in Orlando studying recording arts, music business, and entertainment business, because I had been very clear I didn't want to be an interpreter. But while I was living in Orlando, I had made a lot of deaf friends because these are my people. That's my community. This is who I enjoy spending time with. So I made a lot of deaf friends, and we would gather and do things. And then they would ask me, oh, I have a thing. Can you interpret it for me? You know how that goes. And so I started doing that. I would interpret a little bit for my friends when I was in college and things like that. So I started branching out from only interpreting for my parents and direct close adult family members or friends of my parents, and switching out to my own friends and interpreting for them. And then while I was in school, I got my first job interpreting. It was just a part-time job for, I don't even remember the name of the organization. It was so brief. I think I was only with them for like 6 months. And I think I got paid like $11 an hour. They definitely were taking advantage. They were definitely taking advantage of the CODA kid who didn't know better. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But it was like a workforce management type of organization where deaf people who needed help, it wasn't vocational rehabilitation, but it was an organization that worked alongside Beyond. And they would help deaf people find employment opportunities and things like that. And so I was interpreting for that organization for like 6 months while I was in school. I graduated school and I started working full time in my degree, and so I was working at B.B. King's Blues Club, running lights and sound there for the musicians and things.
It was called what was it? Blues? B.B.
King's Blues Club.
Okay.
In Orlando, and that was awesome. I got to see B.B. King come and perform twice, and
Wow.
some other well-known blues musicians. I got to be in charge of mixing their performances, the audio side. And then I also worked at a television studio, and we would produce a morning show, and every morning we were live for 3 hours. Some people may have heard of the show that was called The Daily Buzz. It was mostly on the CW network nationwide, but it was on a few other affiliates. And I was the audio operator there, and we would have a lot of musicians come on. So that was really cool. I got to work with a lot of famous musicians, and I really liked it. But I started feeling I was like getting away from my deaf community. And from doing those jobs, I got my new job, which brought me to Washington, D.C. And so I started doing live event production for large conferences for a company called Swank Audio Visuals, which got bought out by PSAV. So I was working for this large audio visuals company doing live event production for the president, for Congress, and for the Senate, for large CEOs of corporations that would come into these huge corporate meetings at these big basement ballrooms of these huge hotels in Washington, D.C. I was doing it all the time. And while I was doing that, I was living at a frat house off campus of Gallaudet, because these are my people. This is who I enjoy spending my time with. Mm-hmm. So I was the one hearing guy at the deaf frat house. And I did that for like 2 years, and I got burnt out, and I did not enjoy my job. And I was living in Washington, D.C. at a Gallaudet frat house. I was dating an interpreting student at Gallaudet University at the time. And so I was definitely involved in the community, but I was not working as an interpreter. And then I decided, like, you know what, I've got this skill, I've got this community, it's right here at my doorstep. So I just decided to do a skills assessment with every single interpreting agency in Washington, D.C. that I could think of. And they all accepted me except one. Wow. And so I quit my job and I started freelancing right there.
I see.
Yeah, just like that. And then I worked in D.C. as a freelance interpreter for 2 years. And then I got my NIC. And then shortly after that is when I moved up to Boston, and then the rest is history, I suppose. So that's kind of how I got into it. I started down one path, realized it really wasn't for me, had this other opportunity right in front of me. I was living in D.C., and for those who don't know, D.C. is kind of like the deaf mecca of the world. Sure is. People do move. The deaf community from around the world comes there to go to Gallaudet University. And before the ADA was passed, right, in 1990 or 1991. And so before that, there were no requirements at all for any place ever to provide accommodations, whether it's state, local, corporate, any of it. Nobody had to provide any access at all except for the federal government. And they had that requirement in place since 1973. There's the Federal Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Which is the law that the ADA was modeled after, but then was made to apply to a wider gamut, right? So the Federal Rehabilitation Act of 1973 only applied to the federal government. And so the deaf community would graduate from Gallaudet and stay in D.C. because there was job opportunities that would provide interpreters. And so you have a very strong deaf community in Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area. And so for me to be young and struggling with money at the time and having, very limited options, interpreting was very enticing. I was in D.C. where you can get paid very well as an interpreter compared to the rest of the country. And the amount of opportunities that are available, I mean, if you wanted to, you could work 40 or 50 hours a week if that was what you wanted to do. There's just so much volume of work available there. So I took the opportunity and I ran with it and haven't looked back.
That brings us to today. So you are now have a successful interpreting agency. Tell us about it.
Thank you. So I started Heritage Interpreting. It's been just over 3 years now. It had been something I've been wanting to do for a long time. I studied entertainment business in school, which was, like I said, a business degree focused on the entertainment industry. But it's still a business degree. We developed business plans and we did pro formas and marketing plans and all the things and competitive market analysis, all the things. And so I was familiar with business and I was in love with interpreting. And so I started to play with the two all the time in my head, and I started writing business plans just for fun, and it was always about an interpreting agency. So for years, I had been toying with it. And then January 3 years ago, so January 2019, I decided I'm not playing around or waiting any longer. It's time. So I just kind of flipped the switch and went public with all of this stuff that I had been creating in private for the last several years. And I just did it.
Yeah.
I just launched a website, and I opened up my social media, and I started sharing with the community what my intentions were and why I wanted to start an agency. You know, I wanted to lead. I wanted to be a leader in our field. I wanted to help to improve the sign language interpreting experience for everyone. So when I say that, what that means is that the deaf community's experience of working with interpreters will be improved, because we're going to work with interpreters who meet our core values, not just have the linguistic skills, but also have the ethical understanding. There's a book called The Ideal Team Player, and in that book it talks about people who are hungry, humble, and smart. So these are characteristics of interpreters that we look for: people who are hungry, humble, and smart, in addition to having the linguistic and cultural capacity to provide appropriate access. So that is what it means for improving the experience of sign language interpreting for the deaf community. Improving the experience for the interpreters means that when you work with a team interpreter, when you get assigned to a team, that your team is going to be competent. They know what they're doing. A lot of times, in my experience when I was working in Washington, D.C., I would get teamed with an interpreter who was not well qualified for that particular assignment. And I felt like I had to carry the team, where I was doing all of the work and they were there. And then at the end of the day, we each get paid the same amount, and that really felt wrong. It felt really wrong. The agency would send 2 interpreters because the job needs 2 interpreters, but the reason the job needs 2 interpreters is because it needs a team of interpreters, not just 2 interpreters. There's a difference. So when we talk about heritage interpreting providing an experience that's better for interpreters, it means that you're working with a team and not just another interpreter next to you.
Right.
It also means business practices for the interpreters. We make a point of it to try to pay our interpreters early. Our contract states net 30, which I think is pretty common, but for the most part, we're able to get checks out the door on a weekly basis.
Wow.
So we try to do that. And it's not always possible, especially when there's any type of a conflict. We have to do some kind of reviews of invoices, which that always happens. And so things might get delayed a week or 2, but it's very rare that we push things out to the net 30, which is what the contract says net 30, but most of the time we're getting checks out the door in a week. And so for an interpreter, especially people who are working freelance on 1099s, that's a big deal to be able to get paid quickly. It can be a challenge, I think, for a lot of interpreters. And for the experience for our hearing customers, the way that we approach improving the experience for working for our customers, not the deaf consumers, but the hearing customers, the people who are paying for the service. It's ensuring that what they're paying for is exceeding compliance standards, right? So we have to understand, why are hearing people paying for our service? Most of the time it's because they have to, because there's a law that says they have to.
Right.
And so we want to make sure that because they're making that commitment to paying, that we're giving them something that exceeds compliance standards, and it gives them the peace of mind to know that they are more than just in compliance, but they are exceeding compliance requirements, that they are well beyond any type of a limitation, and that when they work with heritage interpreting, they're going to have quality interpreters. And everybody says you're going to have quality interpreters when you work with us. And so that's why we like to frame it as your compliance requirements are going to be exceeded when you work with us. So that was the onus behind wanting to start Heritage, is being able to improve the interpreting experience for everyone. And we started in January 2019, and then just over a year later, the pandemic hit. And so before the pandemic hit, about 90% of our work was on site. We were not doing VRI work at all, hardly. We were doing pretty much everything on site. And then the pandemic hit, and we had to pivot. quickly. And I think a lot of other interpreting agencies were not prepared to make changes quickly, and that hurt them. Fortunately for us, we were able to make changes. We were able to partner with an organization that we are now able to provide on-demand services.
Wow.
So we have access 24 hours a day to on-demand VRI interpreters, as well as spoken language interpreters on demand for over 240 languages. So you could make a phone call and have a spoken language interpreter on the phone in just a matter of seconds. So we made these strategic partnerships when the pandemic hit to make sure that we were still able to meet the access needs of our customers, because things changed quickly, and not everybody was keeping up with the changes, and we needed to find a way to keep up. And so it was scary for that first 6 months of the pandemic.
Sure.
I didn't know if we would make it through, but I think by making those pivots and making those partnerships, not only did we make it through, but we have since thrived through it. And it's been a great experience. Yeah, I've definitely learned a lot.
You know what? I think all of us have. The face of interpreting changed overnight.
Yes.
No more having, not no more, I'm sure we're getting back into it, but having that live person beside us, as how do we maneuver seeing the interpreter also on the screen, and we're trying to team with them, and how do I make that look so that we're not really just that whole look was a whole new set of rules for all of us. So I'm going to finish with one more question for you, John. Tell me, I'm new, I just graduated, and I'd love to work for Heritage. What are you going to look for in me as somebody who just really doesn't quite have all the experience that it sounds like your agency has, but I want to get there? How can you help me so that I can work for your agency? That's an excellent question.
So I've been lucky enough to be able to work with some amazing people. We have a team now. That's helping me obviously run the company. And whenever we get new applicants, they will sit down with one of our team members and we'll do an interview. And in that interview, we are looking for more than just you telling me what's on your resume. We really want to get to know who you are, but not just who you are, but who you think the deaf community is. And so what I mean by that is the deaf community is an historically oppressed population of people, right? And they are facing oppression every day. And as interpreters, myself included, I'm a CODA, you're a CODA, but we are hearing. We can hear. And hearing people are the oppressor class, okay? And so as interpreters, we come into the deaf community with the best of intentions. We want to help. But we have to remember that we are from the oppressor class. Wow. And we're entering an oppressed group of people, and that everything we do has an impact on their lives, right? When I was born, there was an interpreter there. There's a photo of me the day I was born, my mom and dad holding me in the hospital room, and the interpreter off to the side, okay? And when I die at my funeral, there will be a lot of deaf people there, and there will be an interpreter there. And it's the same. So in my life, and it's because of my association with the deaf community, but in the deaf community as well, from cradle to grave, interpreters are within your lives.
Wow.
So the deaf community makes this decision every time. They have to be consciously vulnerable to allow another person into their lives so that they can have access. That is already putting them into, that is an oppressive life experience. And so us being the interpreters, we show up and we make it all about us. Mm-hmm. We have to do this, we have to do that. And so I call it interpreter entitlement. And it's not just, and so when I say interpreter entitlement, people take it at face value to think that people are acting entitled. And it's a lot more than that.
Yes, I agree.
There's a model, I'll give you an example. There's a model of interpreting that's very popular, and it's called the demand control schema. The demand control schema is a good model. It helps a lot of interpreters figure out how they can approach different situations. But my My problem with the demand control schema is that it puts the interpreter at the center of the model, and it's all about the interpreter. There's another model of interpreting that's not as popular, but I like it a lot more, and it's called the deaf-centered model of interpreting. And that was developed by Marlene Elliott, and it blew me away.
Her. Did you see her interview?
I did not. No, she's a good friend of mine. I had no idea you interviewed her.
Yes, I interviewed her, so look for her. Yes, I just met her myself, though.
She's great. And she developed a deaf-centered model of interpreting. And so all of that to say, when you're coming into Heritage, we are looking for interpreters who understand that dynamic, and not just like, oh, I understand it because I read about it once, but people who have internalized the dynamic, understand the actual impact it has on real people. It makes a difference when you understood it at that level, and then you go out into the community and you're practicing your profession, and it's a practice profession because every day you're learning.
Yes. Yes.
So
Amen.
It's beyond the linguistic and cultural competency. Linguistic and cultural competencies are the foundation of what we do, but they are not all we do. So we're looking for people who have the linguistic and cultural competency as a baseline, right? If you don't have that, then you're not qualified to work with Heritage. But if you do have that's just the baseline. We're looking for people who get it.
Wow, that sounds, yeah. I mean, I can't agree with you even more. And all the things that you said, I'm sitting here shaking my head, yes. I don't know if you could hear it. But yes, and you know what? I think we need to do another interview based just on that topic in itself. I'm an educator, and I think our students that the first thing they just give me a job, just get me out there, get me a job. And we encourage them to, get in the deaf community, immerse yourself. Every interview I have done, everybody has said the same thing. I was part of the deaf community. The fortunate thing for you and I, John, is we were born into it. So the effort kind of looks like it's not as hard for us because we're born into it. Yep, you're right. But I also made the decision to continue to be in the deaf community. And I have to say that my father just passed away in April.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And I felt an extreme loss, not because my father died, because I did. I'm not saying that. The loss I felt, and I shared this with the other friends, is my connection.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm 63 years old. I have a 63-year-old connection. But I still feel like I lost a little bit of that. Because that deaf community, and you said this is my people, this is my community. And I totally agree with that. John, thank you so much. I'm sorry I got a little teary-eyed there. You really hit upon a lot of things for me. I don't know if this interview is going to be for me or for our listening audience, but I think it is. You have been a delight, and you've been so enlightening, and I thank you very, very much. I'd love to do another interview with you, and I'd love to invite your wife as well. I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, and I don't mean to give her that label of just your wife, but Christy. I would love to invite both of you again. You have been a blessing to me. I cannot tell you enough. And
Thank you, Tina.
Absolutely. And to our listening audience, I'm not finished any of my interviews this way, but this really brought out some things in me that I miss. I miss my family, of course, my mom and dad. I still have aunts and uncles, but I miss that. I don't know if I've lost that connection. It could just be my own belief. I don't think I have, but I think I miss it. And John, you have you sound so enthused, and I'm so glad to hear that Heritage is doing well. There are so many good interpreting community agencies in Columbus. They're really a blessed community to have all of the different agencies and to have somebody like you at the helm of so many interpreters and helping them. I thank you for that. And for our listening and reading audience, thank you for joining us today. And I will also include John's information if you want to contact contact him, especially if you're somebody who thinks, you know, one day I want to work for an agency like that. I think there's nothing wrong with contacting an interpreting agency and saying, maybe I'm not ready right now, but help me to get there. And I feel like John would be a great person to help you get to that place where you would love to be. Again, John, thank you.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thank you so very much. And again, thank you to our viewing audience. Have a great day.